something about and for Dad. And so
I need to tell the story of how Robert and I met on different days. Different places. Saw this tall guy in crowds at the Unitarian Church. He had stringy hair, and he had a terrible purple sweater that the arms hit him about here. Anyway, I started making eye contact with him, and I would kind of look at him. He would kind of look at me, and I would kind of smile at him, and he would kind of smile at me. And then Libby had a fellowship dinner, Unitarian fellowship dinner, and it so happened that both Robert and I were in her fellowship group. I can't remember whether we spoke, but anyway, after the dinner was over, we were going out to our various vehicles. He said, "Where have you been?" And I said, "What do you mean, where have I been?" But he met me then, and I met him a long time before that.
Our breakfast group was formed, and there were a dozen of us, maybe 14, around the supper table. Robert suggested that we go around the table and each of us tell about our fathers, what our fathers had done. When we made it all the way around, and we thought, wow. Then he said, "I have another idea. Let's each tell what we learned from our first spouse." Well, then I remember another time when we all were out to a restaurant, and Robert brought a guest, and he seated her next to me and pointed out that her name was Libby and my name was Libby, and then he walked away. And you know, what do you say? I said, "Oh, so how do you know Robert?"
I remember that story.
We raised 4 children together.
So this story, it was emailed to me from my sister Jessica, and she wrote in to talk about the ostrich Halloween. We were a bunch of boisterous kids, and we didn't grow up with a lot of money, and so what we grew up with was a lot of eclectic, crafty, sort of like do-it-yourself everything. So one year, my dad had this idea that we were going to have a spectacular Halloween this year. But it had to be do-it-yourself, right? And so he goes out and buys a bunch of chicken wire and a bunch of these big stacks of newspapers, and we start constructing with these enormous chicken wire things, these ostrich bodies. And so each ostrich body was like a big sphere like this, and then we had to construct a big neck like this and put a little beak on. And then you had to get like a pair of throwaway pants, and you would stuff them with cloth and hang them over the ostrich body, and then you yourself would wear like really bright orange tights so that your legs are the ostrich legs. And so you put this little, sphere of paper mache around you, and then you have this ostrich neck popping up, and then you have this like fake jockey where your upper part of your body look like they're connected with these pants that are hanging over the ostrich body. It's kind of like, go around like this with your little ostrich and your rider, right? So we made these things for weeks, we're slaving over these like costumes and trying to get the neck just right and the beak just right and the little pants, and all the jockeys have little numbers on the back, and because we're growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, right? Kentucky Derby. We made all this effort into these costumes. We're not just gonna like walk around our little neighborhood and like go trick or treat. So he gets us to go all downtown with our little ostrich costumes, and I'm like 10, my sister's 12, or it's kind of like, I don't know, it's a little embarrassing maybe at this point, So we go downtown, and he decides that we're going to run a ostrich race down the Ped Mall of 4th Street in downtown Louisville on Halloween night. And so we tried to get the news media there to cover it. I don't think they came. And eventually, we decided we need more of an audience. So we go traipsing through like the Brown Hotel, down there, Steel Block, and we're, in our little ostrich costumes. And I think we ended up getting a few photographs out of it, but we definitely had a few confused diners at the same time. And I think we had those ostrich costumes in our house for about 15 years after that.
Robert is quite simply one of the most curious people and one of the most playful people that I've ever met. The story I want to tell is actually when we went to Italy. Susie was there, I was there with Steph, and we were going to meet Steph's sister Jessica in a small town in Italy. And it was robust family experience. We were traveling all together for an extended period of time, and there was trouble making decisions, as you might expect. And at some point, I decided, I've had enough. I've got to get out of here. I'm going to kill these people. And so I decided, I'm just going to go have a walk, and I'll meet you guys later. And so I went on my merry way, took a nice walk, ended up by the lakeside, had dinner, and then I made my way back to the little place where we're staying. And upon my entrance into the place where we're staying, one of the waiters said, "Oh, we had to call the police." and that's when I knew, like, whoa, have I been out too long? I didn't know I had caused any trouble. And it turns out that not only is Robert playful, and not only is Robert curious, but he and his family were also deeply concerned for my well-being. They were so concerned, they were convinced that I had fallen down in a hole somewhere in northern Italy, and the mafia had gotten me. And there was a few tense moments there where we had to sort of reintegrate.
But the story actually is about when I was in high school. And it started to be a really hard time when I was about 12, and I went from being like a straight A student to being to not going to school. I would just cut school all the time. I started hanging out with the wrong kids. I was smoking, and I started getting crappy grades. And my dad at the time, he had all kinds of crazy stuff going on in his life. He'd fairly freshly divorced, trying to figure out what he's doing with his own life. All these 4 kids, the house is falling apart. Here's this kid who's like starting to screw up all this. I remember distinctly that he took days off of work and drove me to different places around Louisville to take me to check out what the vocational school was like. Let's check out what this program is like for at-risk youth who are doing gardening and knitting or something. I don't know what the heck they were doing, but something to keep them out of trouble, And so he took me all over the place to check out different alternatives. But then at one point we got to this school called the Browns, a K-12 school, and it was really informal. There were couches everywhere. There were, the kids would call their teachers by their first name, and all these things appealed to me. I thought, yeah, this is great. And they happened to have an opening. It's really hard to get into the school. They got me in there somehow, and I think it must have been a lot of work to get me in there, actually. And I think in retrospect about how much work he was putting into trying to set me off onto a better path. So I ended up at the Brown School, and I immediately started doing better in school. I ended up taking classes on my lunch break. I started taking Spanish classes at the University of Louisville. I started taking German on my lunch break, racking enough credits up over time that I was able to graduate from high school when I was 16. And so I got out of there, and I became an exchange student. I won a grant, I won a fellowship. I went abroad. I became an exchange student, lived with this host family in Germany, learned fluent German, and I ended up, getting into Smith. All these things just started falling into place, and I really feel like there were other little detours that I took in life, but I really feel like there was this crucial moment there in my middle school years where somebody had to be paying attention, and he did, and he was. And this is one of the many reasons that I
The first time I saw Robert, it was at the Unitarian Church, quite a number of years ago. I didn't really meet Robert. I met the man who discovered the New World. You were in some sort of play. He was Columbus. And I'd never seen him before in the church until he got up there and was talking to the Queen. It seems to me you were talking about money that the Queen might give to the church or something like that. Who is this person? This man's got something that we want to watch. If he can get money from the Queen.